Hey everyone, welcome to the GTM News Show. I got Nick here today. Hey Nick.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing well, doing well. Thanks for coming on the show. So I wanted to invite Nick on. So Nick and I met probably just a kind of little story for everyone. Nick and I probably met maybe a year and a half ago. He was working at Alice, and he was really active on LinkedIn and always offered to spend time with folks and share what he's learning from marketing and customer. And I was at the point I was running some customer marketing programs, advocacy programs, and so he offered to jump on a Zoom, and so we spent 30 minutes chatting. He shared a bunch of cool ideas. He was also able to share some about Alice and position Alice. And what I noticed, and the reason why I want to bring Nick on was he has done a phenomenal job of really employee advocacy and really leveraging his own personal brand to promote his company, the companies he's worked at, and drive new revenue for them. But then on the flip side, and we'll kind of catch up to a year and a half later where he's at now, how he's been able to build his own personal brand, start his own company, and ride off into the sunset. And so first, I kind of want to talk about Nick. Let's talk about kind of the company side and customer advocacy. What have you seen successful? And Cisco actually a couple months ago, I think it was one of their executives said that they were going to train 84,000 employees on how to be LinkedIn influencers and leverage LinkedIn. And I think even as we go into this AI world, right, this new era of AI, building relationships and one-to-one interactions. I mean, people buy from people, right? That's always been the saying. But I think it's gonna be even more so when we get into this even more. It's gonna be hard to know what's real, right, on the internet. So I'd love to hear from your perspective. What have you seen from an employee advocacy standpoint? How has it been beneficial for the companies you've worked at? You advocating for them on LinkedIn, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a win-win ultimately, but it needs to start from the top. Like you need to have these leaders that are empowering to their employees to want to even go down this path. And so if you don't have an executive like a CEO or executive team that maybe is active on LinkedIn, it's hard to be like, "Hey, I'm an employee." Like I see the personal value in it, but like as an employee, you may not see the value in creating content for LinkedIn. And some people are like, well, why would I do this if my team isn't even doing it? So I think you need to see the empowerment, which is why like the Cisco thing is so interesting to me because it's like, listen, they see this as a huge investment in both time and value. They know it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. But if they can invest in their people, if they can empower their people to ultimately be their evangelists, it's a win-win. They get to grow the business. Bottom line, profit goes up, revenue goes up, all those things. Shareholders are happy. The employees also get to take on hopefully additional responsibilities down the road. They get to be on podcasts, all these different types of things. So it's a win-win, but if you don't start from the top through empowerment, it's never going to be successful. And I think that was one of the biggest things that I've seen after working in B2B tech for the last like 12 years. And I've only been active on LinkedIn really these last 4, but it starts from the top and it starts with the empowerment piece, or else it just all crumbles besides that.
Mm, well said. I love that and having that leadership and because it is kind of it's a weird arena to go into, right? Like I think it's one thing to post your own content and your own thoughts, but to represent the company on with cancel culture, with all these huge pushbacks if you mess up. So maybe any thoughts on that of like what have you seen and maybe some best practices or maybe from the top, but even ways employees can protect themselves when they go out there. Any thoughts in that whole arena? Love to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've actually done a lot of like LinkedIn trainings for companies, and that this is one of the biggest questions that comes up. What if I have like a rogue employee that just starts like s- trashing the company or telling our secrets, all these things? And I'm like, well, I don't think you need a handbook per se for like how to act on LinkedIn. Listen, we're all adults. Hopefully we do this. If there's issues, you can discipline that person as need be, terminate them if you have to. But we're all adults. I think we understand what we should and what we shouldn't talk about in a public and professional setting. Hopefully, or if not, there's bigger issues there. I think.
Hmm.
I think one of the biggest things is just setting boundaries to a certain degree, but being okay to let the creativity come out from beyond that. So if you want to be like, hey, listen, I don't care what you talk about, just don't bash the company, don't talk about secrets, don't talk about financial numbers, whatever it is. Cool, that's all fair game. I get that. I would never talk about those things publicly either if I'm not allowed to. But if I can talk about the projects that I'm working on, the stuff that is cool, the successes I've seen, the failures I've seen, I don't think that bashes the company. I think it only showcases how your mind works as an employee, which honestly is going
Mm.
to lead you to future opportunities at other companies because no one stays at the same company anymore as long as they used to. Um,
Mm.
I think I was reading something like a couple weeks ago that was saying that B2B marketers today, on average, stay at companies for 18 months. That's kind of like the average, like, and this is like director and manager level people. So 18
Wow.
months in B2B tech, which is pretty interesting. And that was a 2023 survey. I forget where I read it, but I was just like, oh, it's so fascinating to me,
Fascinating.
which makes sense because CMOs also have a pretty like low tenure as well. But that's why, like, again, have your boundaries, cool, but like there's no downside to this. It's just like the creativity piece. Like some people don't feel comfortable putting their thoughts out there because of the cancel culture. Listen, like there's always going to be imposter syndrome. There's always going to be mental barriers that you need to overcome. But the first thing that I told myself is when you hit publish on anything, a blog post, a social media post, whatever it is, there's going to be people that judge you. And that's okay because your content and who you are isn't for everyone. And you will find your tribe. You will find the community of people that want to be with you, that find value in who you are as an individual. And ultimately, like all those things will rise together.
Mm, I love that. And even on that last note, as far as the imposter syndrome or the fear, I think what's really cool about creating content is you usually attract people that are like you, right? You'll get
Mhm.
those folks that are like, oh, I vibe with Taylor's or Nick's personality. I vibe with, and there's probably something really deep and like, that in our psyche that just connects with people that are like us. Obviously, we can't even quantify it or even articulate it. Obviously, but as you do that, you'll attract those people, and you don't even need. And that's why I think there's like some amazing creators out there, and they attract other amazing folks. And then there's also creators out there that that don't create great content, but they still attract an audience because they're attracting people that are like them, right? And so there's this weird, no judgment, obviously, but there's this weird world where you'll attract people like you based upon how your personality and whatnot. Especially in this AI world, like so much of it's going to be about personality and your story and your values and all that fun stuff. And we could probably talk about content for hours.
Well, I
But
was
I'd
gonna
love to
say,
dive a little. Oh yeah,
well,
go
I was
ahead.
gonna say
Yeah,
real quick to that one piece. So like
yeah.
you have to have a POV. You have to stand for something because of
Mm.
how noisy today's world is, and like just like you said, like AI, all this stuff. I mean, LinkedIn is just AI comments, AI content. Like it's easy to spot out, honestly. But if you don't stand for something, if you don't have a unique POV on like how you approach either a category, thoughts, whatever it is, like you're just gonna get drowned in the noise out there.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, having a point of view that's differentiated and even based upon your perspective and your story. I work with this SEO agency, and we've talked a lot about how your perspective in your content is actually what's differentiating your stories, how you actually provide content that is not all the content, but just for time people that have time restrictions, right? So creating content that's actually like super impactful just based upon the time constraints everyone has. And so I love all that. It's super cool. I'd love to kind of go back a little bit in regards to the company side. What have you seen? Like, what are some of the successes you've seen driving revenue or traffic, or what are some of the things you've seen with the companies you've worked at when you were doing? And I also love to talk about maybe some of the content, because I'm sure it wasn't all like how we got connected wasn't about a gifting platform when you're
Right.
working at Alice, right? We got connected on customer marketing, which ties into it tangentially, and eventually it got to that. But I'd just love to hear your thoughts on the benefits from the company side and why they should encourage it.
Yeah. So I've been kind of like operating under this at three companies. So at a company called Clary, that's actually where I like got my start. So Kyle Coleman, he's the now CMO at Clary. He was my boss at the time. That's how I kind of got started
Hmm.
on this whole like LinkedIn journey and like talking about field marketing initially, because that was like what I did for years. It was what I was known for. No one knew like the misconceptions of what it was or like how it actually impacted a revenue organization. So because of Kyle, I actually got started down that journey. So Clary saw a lot of success. I think where I finally saw like some mega success was actually with Alice. So like I was there for 2 years. In the 2 years that I was there, I drove $2 million in self-reported attribution pipeline that I could track specifically from my LinkedIn profile. 60% of that 2 million, so 1.2 million actually closed. So like $1.2 million at a zero cost outside of my salary. And again, not I would say 95% of my content never actually talked about Alice, gifting, direct mail, anything like that. It was just projects that I was working on. It was customer marketing, it was ABM, it was just all the different things that we worked on. But ultimately, it built trust in people where it's like, hey, like, listen, I click my profile, I see where I work, or I'm in these communities. People are like, hey, I do have a need for this, or hey, I'd love to learn more. And maybe I'm not a buyer right now, but what's to say 6 months, a year down the line, you're not a buyer? I still have people to this day that message me like, hey, I actually just requested a demo of Alice. I know you haven't been there in like a little bit, but
Wow.
you were how I initially got like them on my radar. And I just find that so fascinating to me because again, I never talked about the company, and now, I mean, I haven't been there for what a while, probably about a year and a half or so. And like people are still referencing that a year and a half later. And then I went to AirMeet, and again, my boss, who's now my co-founder, Mark Killens, we did this at AirMeet, and again, we him and I used a very similar approach. We used the same playbook, and we were able to drive a ton through self-reported attribution, not only through me, but we were seeing stuff through him. I started to get additional people on the team to be able to do that. And when you can create kind of like an army of all these little like evangelists, think about how much, one, that saves you on paid media spend, but two, like
Mm.
how much of a reach you can actually get. Now listen, I know like the algorithm on LinkedIn's crushing everyone, it's crushing me. I'm seeing like a 60% drop, but it doesn't matter. If you have 20 people like me within a company, you're still going to see amazing results. And I think it's just like getting started on like, what does that journey look like? Who's going to be the point person for this entire journey? And ultimately, how are you going to capture the data and the stuff that comes in? And I think self-reported attribution, at least from my point of view, has been the easiest way to do it. I know attribution is another whole conversation, but that's how I've been able to prove success at now three companies, and now honestly off on my own as well.
Oh, Nick, that's so cool. I got like goosebumps just talking through because it's amazing. I mean, even if you got 10% of the results you got, that would still have been a net positive. You based upon like how much, especially SaaS companies spend on marketing and sales and to acquire new customers. Like, not only the ripple effect. I mean, we brought up Alice multiple times in this show. Like, and it has nothing to do with, right? And so it has nothing to do, we're not talking about gifting at all, but just the ripple effects of that. And I think what I noticed in my interactions with you was what was really powerful, and maybe I'd love to hear any additional thoughts on this, was the content you shared. You said it wasn't even about gifting or the platform, like 90% of it was. Maybe a little bit was, right? And you kind of had some of that in there. And it was maybe 2 or 3 degrees away from the product, or even like 7 degrees away, right? It had nothing to do with the product at all, but you built trust with people, right? You build rapport. You're like, hey, this Nick guy is cool. Like, that's how I jumped on a call with you. I was like, hey, this guy knows what he's talking about in the customer marketing world, or he's doing all these cool things. I'd love to pick his brain. Not, really far removed. And I'd love to hear your thoughts just for like folks that are getting started with maybe creating content, or if a company is encouraging creating content, how do you think about, because I think what's so fascinating is it's not reverse psychology, but it is a form of, it's everyone's expecting to be pitched, right? Everyone's expecting to get a like, oh, Nick works for Alice and he's going to talk about gifting platform and here's his, pitch on it, or even best practices, right? And you kind of get numb to that. And you're like, okay, he's obviously just promoting. He has a bias and it's going to be tilted towards that. So you're built trust because the content has nothing to do with your product. Any thoughts on that? Like how you can encourage folks to get started with creating content that has nothing to do with your product?
Yeah, I think it's just talking about the projects and the campaigns that you're working on. Honestly, like I've always, as a field marketer, been really close to the customer. So at Alice, like when they asked me to do customer marketing, I never did customer marketing before officially. But I was like, all right, cool. Like I get it. We're in a downturn. Like the economy's crap. This is a great way to save my job. I was like, you know what? I just want to talk about the stuff that I'm working on. And I can't tell you like how incredible like the customer marketing community was out there. The people that have been doing this for like 10, 20 years that like I turned to for questions, for advice, for feedback in these communities that I was in. And ultimately it helped me like build a lot of my initial campaigns, and those campaigns saw some decent success. And again, this was someone that like has never officially done this before. All I tried to do was just showcase the different types of projects that I was working on. Again, going back to the successes, the failures. No one on LinkedIn likes to talk about failures. They think it's like some like black sheep of the family type thing where it's like, listen, like it's okay to talk about failures because I guarantee you that successful campaign probably had 20 failures behind it, but you didn't talk about those. You talked about the success. But what about the failures? How can you take those lessons learned and actually propel yourself forward to not only help yourself, but help everyone else that's listening to you? Because even if they're not liking your content on LinkedIn or you're commenting, because when I got started, like no one liked my stuff. Like it was like basically silence for months. And the majority of LinkedIn people are lurkers. And you wouldn't believe it how many lurkers are out there that are consuming your content. And you're writing because you enjoy it. You're writing because you want to. You're writing because you're hopeful that it will help someone else. Those lurkers are consuming that and it's helping those people. And they're never going to tell you unless they DM you. But that's how I found out about a lot of these things. I got DMs from people that are like, hey, I'll never like your content. I'll never comment on it. It's not my thing. I don't want to be out in the public, but I just want to say thank you because this was incredibly helpful. That's my motivation for continuing to do what I did.
That's cool. I can totally resonate with that and relate. Where I get people, even like friends or people like that, like, oh, I saw that. I'm like, oh, wow, why don't you like it? First of all, you're my friend. No, just joking. But yeah, there's that element of where there's so many, and I do it too. Like I consume content, never like it or comment or whatever for whatever reason, and so definitely guilty of that. And then you also see, back to your story originally, the ripple effects of your advocacy, and years down the road, right? People are still reaching out to your former employers, and the benefit of that, super powerful. Like it's just, I don't think people can really understand the power of that. And there's no way to quantify it too. And to your point about self-report attribution, maybe just like 1 minute on just your thoughts on self-report attribution. If no one's ever heard of that, how would you go about measuring some of these initiatives?
Yeah, so pretty simple. On your demo form, when people go to fill out a demo on your website, there's a usually people have it as a drop down. It's like, how did you hear about us? And there's a drop down of like 10 options, like Google or internet or podcast or whatever it is. As marketers, we like to put people in boxes. I think there's a better way to do it. And honestly, I take no credit for this. Chris Walker's the first person that I heard that ever kind of like talked about this years ago. And so on your demo form, instead of that drop down, get rid of that, keep the how did you hear about us, make it a required field, but have an open text box there so people can talk about exactly how they heard about you. Maybe they heard me and you talking right now and then they went on the website, they listened to another event. There could be 3 or 4 things, and in my past there was people that put down 6 or 7 different things that led them to that initial demo request that we would never have captured. Maybe a salesperson or SDR or BDR might have got a piece of that on a initial like discovery call, a qualification call, but like usually not. And like I think there's so much value in doubling down on the channels that then people are already hearing about you on. It's just you have to capture that info and do something actionable with it.
Very cool. I love it. Yep, super helpful. I think I've used that in multiple companies I've worked in, and great way to kind of supplement marketing automation, attribution, and have kind of a clearer picture on what's going on. You definitely get some really interesting insights on that. Super cool. Just kind of a couple more points on the company side. I'd love to hear from you. So I heard, obviously start with the leadership. The leadership needs to post. They need to engage as well. They kind of need to set the example, which I think it's a great advice in general for any business when you're trying to do anything new. You talked about folks talking about things that have, talk about their projects. You talked about failures, things they're struggling with, and even you'll get help. That's the cool thing too. Like you got tons of help with your community. You'll do better at your job. Like if employers are thinking about this, like not only is it great to advocate your products or services, but your team is going to get the help they need. They're going to get the community and support they need when they start sharing what's working, what's not working, and build that community. So really cool additional benefit of you'll solve more problems in your business if your employees are active in their community. And then you talked about imposter syndrome. Anything else kind of high level, like you advise other companies on how to get started with this, posting once a week, a Slack group where everyone's sharing and a pod. Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah, so I think in one additional benefit that I actually forgot to mention is hiring and recruiting, honestly, which again, right now, not many companies are hiring, although I am seeing more companies, like people getting new jobs on LinkedIn. So that's exciting. Hopefully the economy's bouncing back. But like, so, for example, let's take Alice as an example. So like when we had new roles and I posted about those roles and people knew who I was, we would get so many applications for those specific roles. And then the beauty is when, because let's be honest, you're not going to stay at these companies. You're going to get better opportunities. You're going to go, maybe you become a VP of marketing or a CMO. You continue to move up in your career. The thing that's going to happen is when you leave and your role opens to backfill, you're going to have so many people who not only want the role because they learned so much while you were there, that they're going to be like, wow, this brand's amazing. I want to work for them. It's just like, it becomes a flywheel that people just want to be involved because they saw so much awesomeness over the years from the people that were creating content that it seemed like a place that they wanted to be. And I think that was an initiative, like that's another benefit that companies should think about. When it comes to getting started, I definitely think a Slack group internally is the way to go, because you're going to need someone to champion this and like be the point person to pull this all together. And again, I've seen this be multiple people. I've seen it be a CMO. I've seen it be a VP of marketing. I've seen it be a social media manager. So it really depends like who you want that point person to be, but they're going to be the one that answers all the questions, that helps kind of like handhold a little bit to get started storming. Because so many people want to create content, want to get started, but have no clue how to actually do it. So you help them like, hey, what are you passionate about? What are you working on? And you use this as a way to help them brainstorm the ideas that they want to be able to get started. And then they start to get it after maybe a couple weeks, maybe a couple months, depending what it is. But I've seen this work for engineers. I've seen this work for marketers, finance people. Doesn't matter the department. They just need a little bit of hand-holding to be able to get started. And then you can use it as an amplification tool as well. Like, listen, hey, drop your LinkedIn posts inside of our Slack channel, and the entire company can rally behind you, get behind it, which is going to give you a nice little boost to get started. And don't feel like your content isn't making a difference if no one likes your stuff, because again, that's the biggest issue that I see is like people post and they don't see those like fancy vanity metrics that people think like matter, but they drop off because they're like, oh, no one's reading my stuff. Trust me, people are reading your stuff. You have to keep going. You have to consistently show up every single day, whether that means posting, whether that means commenting on other people's stuff. Like it's a two-way street ultimately.
Well said. Great pieces of advice. I'd love to hear your thoughts just real quick on community-led growth. So we talked about like big communities like LinkedIn. Any thoughts on how employees can participate in all these micro communities? I know you have Tact, which we can talk about here in a second as well too. And I'd love to hear about, is there anything different about how they interact with, or any thoughts on interacting in all these micro communities that we see now?
Yeah, so funny enough, we've actually built kind of like a three-stage maturity model for like how we see community-led growth, member-led growth, customer-led growth, all these things. But going to like community-led growth specifically, And I actually made a post about this today. It's like 7 steps to get started with like a community led approach. That hopefully people. Funny thing is, no one sees my content on LinkedIn anymore. Like I feel like I'm back to like where I was 4 years ago, where I get like 700 impressions. I don't know who I got angry at LinkedIn or whatever, but like no one sees my stuff anymore. So, but I did make a post about that. But when I think about like stage one, it's all about listening and engaging in the places where your buyers and customers are participating. Maybe it's a community like Peak, for example. Maybe it's Demand by Metadata. Like you're, or maybe you're in IT and it's like a DevOps community or something. Like you have to find where your buyers and customers are participating, and you meet them there by listening and engaging. How can you add unique perspectives and value to the conversation to ultimately form a relationship? Because again, going back to like what you said, people buy from people, but you have to do it from the voice of the person, not the brand. I think as you start to think how this evolves from 1 to 2 to 3, when you get to 3, it's really about establishing really a set of rituals, habits. How do you continually engage in the right places with the right offers? But it's not about just like going out and pitching your stuff. It's like, how do you partner with brands and people to accelerate relationship building? That's ultimately what we want to do. You want to build relationships, and then ultimately you want to accelerate those relationships. So you have to design a model that measures and predicts engagement and ultimately like the leads. And so there's the middle piece there, which is really like, how do you partner? But it's like step one, which is really stage one for us, and then like stage three. And I mean, you can get even deeper than this, but I think it's a good starting point for people.
I love it. That's super cool. And I'm going to go check out that post and on your profile because I'm curious more about that. And I think especially with all these social media platforms, I mean, I'm sure there'll be another one. I'm sure LinkedIn maybe will have a resurgence down the road. I'm sure there'll be another platform that people can engage on. But if you're not getting tons of traction on LinkedIn, or if it's taking a while, or you want to do more, I think these other communities are a way to supplement it and engage even more so, and even more targeted, and even more less noisy. I found all these different communities and whatnot. So it's definitely a way to do both. It's definitely different, but
can I add one more
yeah,
thing as
please,
well?
yeah,
So I think going
yeah.
back to just how like LinkedIn again, like the reach and everything. I think it's important to figure out how do you activate and grow audiences with owned media ultimately. Like if you think about like the
Mm,
digital landscape, brands and people, you got to meet your audiences where they are on owned media platforms. But owned media represents a powerful opportunity to grow your ideal customer base. So ultimately, how do you ideate owned media content that reaches your target personas? How do you distribute and promote your owned media assets? And then how do you measure benchmark performance of your own channels? But ultimately, you need to get off all of these kind of like borrowed media to a certain
mm.
degree. It's like, and you need to get them to owned media because again, you control the owned media at the end of the day.
Oh, well said, Nick. We've had a couple episodes on that conversation of versus the paid and rented media, and getting folks onto your assets and pushing them that way you can own that relationship and whatnot. We need to have you back on because we probably could talk for another hour. And we're about out of time here. In 1 or 2 minutes, I'd love to hear. So we've talked about like all the successes of of the companies you work for. Where are you today? What has you contributing and building your own personal brand? What has it created? And love to hear just about Tact and people first growth, which you've kind of hinted at here in our last couple minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. So Mark Killens and I, so he was at HubSpot, he was at Drift, and then we worked together at AirMeet. We co-founded Tact, which is honestly it's a media and on-demand go-to-market firm ultimately, and we have 3 core pillars. So we have a media network, which is going to be launching on November 2nd. We
Ooh,
have a
exciting.
membership component, which is Club PF. So we have about 130 paid members within this community right now. And then we have TAC GTM, which is really like the marketing services component. So fortunately, we've been lucky enough. We have about 11 clients right now. All of them have come inbound through the content that both Mark and I have created over the years. We're very, very fortunate. But everything that we do puts people first, go to market at the center of it. And so like a simple definition of people first go to market is a business strategy that uses relationships and partnerships to create, capture, and convert demand into revenue, but it's designed to put people at the center of every interaction and experience. And so many people are stuck in that company first mindset, which is like the old way. So it's like brand spam, lead quantity, transactional on your own. And then there's a bunch of ways why B2B go to market must evolve. But the new way is this people first. So it's like meaningful interactions. It's all about creating demand, relationships, and ultimately partnership centric, which is like everything that you should do when you go to market should be with someone, not on your own anymore.
Oh, that's awesome, Nick. And I love that. And I think even going back to the world of AI, the relationships are going to be even that much more important. It's been really cool to watch your journey. I'm a member of Tact in your community. Really excited to see where you all are going. Thanks for coming on. How can folks follow you on LinkedIn or other places?
Yeah, definitely. Nick Bennett on LinkedIn. Although there is a couple of Nick Bennett's on LinkedIn. We get confused a few times. But Nick Bennett from Tact. Follow me there. Ask me questions. Check out tactgtm.com. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm always open to conversation. So shoot me a DM. Happy to chat.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. Really fascinating conversation. We'll have to have you back on, like I mentioned. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you next week. Thanks again, Nick.
Thank you.